Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to the 10K Collective podcast, a sub-podcast of the amazing FBA family. And today we're talking about numbers, which is always important, and especially trying to figure out your profit and cash flow, which is an area lots and lots of us have pain with. So today we have Sergey Faldin of Sellerscale. Sellerscale is a managerial accounting platform that helps Amazon sellers stay on top of their financials. So let's find out more about it. First of all, Sergey, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
So obviously you've got an exotic sounding name. That sounds sort of East European or Russian or whatever. So
That's Russian, actually, yeah.
Russian, yeah. So you're from Russia, and but I believe you're coming to us from somewhat closer to me today.
Yeah, actually I live in London right now, so I moved back to London 9 months ago. But yeah, I mean, originally from Russia, I lived in the States. I really lived in four different countries, so
Wow, so you got a very international perspective and perfect
yeah,
English, if I may say, as well.
thanks.
So that's really helpful, I think, because a lot of these software things get developed in one continent, mostly America, and then they have a bit of an American-centric kind of feel to them. And actually, I think these days there's a much broader need across the globe for Amazon sellers. So that's really helpful to know you've got that international background. So let's plunge into the main details here. So we're talking about managerial accounting versus financial accounting.
Right.
Can you explain the difference, first of all, what that's all about?
Yeah, so just first, I want to make a quick disclaimer. I know that there are a lot of gurus and coaches in the Amazon space who are peddling courses, including Amazon, excuse me, accounting courses and coaching products. And most of them don't have the selling expertise and they hide this fact. So, full disclosure, I'm not a seller myself. I am a CMO of Sellerscale. I do sell Kindle books on Amazon, so I'm kind of familiar with Amazon. I do have e-commerce background, but I'm not a seller myself. So I'll be speaking on behalf of Sellerscale as a company. Regarding financial accounting and versus managerial accounting, I mean, when sellers and when entrepreneurs in general think of accounting, they typically think of financial accounting. That's the first thing that people hear. And financial accounting, from our perspective, is primarily used for external parties. For example, taxes, you have investors, lenders, different shareholders, right? So you have the income statement, you have the balance sheet, which is a snapshot of your assets and liabilities, and you have the top software products in the space, Xero and QuickBooks, right? So that's what people think when they think of the word accounting. Now, for Amazon sellers in particular, there are two limitations of financial accounting. First, it's mainly designed for outsiders. So the statements, because they're used for external stakeholders, they're quite standardized, right? So they follow strict principles, strict rules, so that any counterparty can read it. So it doesn't really matter what business you're in. You can be a restaurant, you can be an Amazon business, and they have to be all they have to all look the same, right? So this makes them not really suitable for internal decision making. So when the managerial board, when the entrepreneur sit down, they can't look at the financial accounting statements and make their day-to-day decisions, right? Because they're very broad. And the second thing is they're not real time. So these reports are usually monthly or quarterly, right? You file your taxes once a year. They're designed for periodic reporting, not for continuous reporting, which you need to make decisions. Now, you can't make decisions based only on financial accounting, but financial accounting is still essential, right, for running a business. But managerial accounting, on the other hand, can be anything. So it's basically used for an entrepreneur or the managers of the company to keep track of their day-to-day business performance. You can do it in Excel. You can use a dedicated software like Sellerscale. You can do whatever you want, basically. So there are no strict guidelines. And the main reason for managerial accounting is that it supplies the company's management with information they need to make decisions, right? So it's very actionable. And as I said, it can be anything from dedicated software to Excel to Sellerscale. And the benefits of managerial accounting versus financial accounting is that it's real time. So you can look at it and it can tell you exactly what your sales are right now at this hour at 1:47 p.m. They're very Amazon specific. You can make it so because you can mend it in any way you want. And it's very actionable, so you can rely on it to make decisions.
Excellent. That's a nice, clear set of differences, really. And I guess the one thing I'm getting back is that financial accounting is number one for outsiders, number two, therefore, very rigid, and number three, it's delayed. And actually, is managing for managing purposes, we want something that's very specific to our needs and is quick. Is that the main difference between? Is that right?
Exactly,
Great.
exactly. And you do need both, right? So you can't, what I'm saying is that you can't rely on financial accounting only to make decisions if you're an Amazon seller. You need something to supplement it. So financial accounting is not sufficient.
Yeah, agrees. And the number of people that I've seen, and I've done this myself, that have tried to manage their Amazon account via Zero or QuickBooks or spreadsheets, which is even worse, than they quickly come to grief because they're trying to solve, like, it's like trying to do higher mathematics when actually you just need something very simple but accurate. And I've always been pleading with people not to do that. So I'm glad to support, getting a
Exactly,
tool out there
exactly.
that helps people clarify this because there's so much muddle and confusion out there amongst particularly the people in their first few $1,000s a month in sales. My experience, they often
Exactly,
come to me as
exactly.
coaching clients and their finances are just a mess. So by the way, I just wanted to thank you first of all for your candor and saying that you're not selling on Amazon, although in fact you are, but ebooks are a bit different from physical products. but
Yeah, exactly.
but I do understand that that Paul, who founded Sellerscale, is in fact selling on Amazon himself. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, he's actually the top 5% Amazon merchant. I mean, at peak, he was making 500, 600K per year, which
Hmm.
is not huge, but sufficient enough for him to introduce him to the intricacies of the Amazon space.
Yeah, sure. So that's good to know. So the software is being built by a financial expert and Amazon seller. So that's just to flag that up because I appreciate your candor, but it's important to know that it has been built by somebody who understands Amazon as well. All right, so let's talk about that topic I was just touching on there, that my clients do find this stuff hard. I find it hard. And I remember literally being in a mastermind a few years ago with some really smart Amazon sellers, and one of the guys literally had a nosebleed during the latter half of the meeting because he'd been up since 4 a.m. trying to do his bookkeeping. So this stuff is, physically dangerous occasionally. This is very rare, by the way. I don't claim this is going to happen. I'm not going to bring a lawsuit against Amazon for nosebleeds, but that's just like really, really, it was a very extreme version of the stress that is caused by this stuff. So why
Yeah,
is
yeah.
Amazon accounting so hard?
Well, I think that we need to start with problem zero, right? So I think that because Amazon is so easy to start, right? And actually, I'm a podcast host myself, and we had one of the guests recently, and he called Amazon e-commerce and training wheels. So basically, you have a lot of people and entrepreneurs who enter the space, and they might not even had any prior experience running an e-commerce or even a business before, right? So you have these tens of millions of billions of dollars really running, and they're being operated by people who and companies who often lack tight operating procedures and financial discipline. And in our experience, and my experience and Paul's, the most underdeveloped piece of operation in the Amazon space is financial management. So many sellers don't even know what their profitability is, let alone understand the deep intricacies of the unit economics or cost structure, right? And we have a lot of users who are not very technical, and they thank us for creating this easy to use tool because we make it all very transparent. But really, it's a big problem because sellers who aren't skilled in Excel, for instance, to begin with, they have no option but to run their businesses blindly without accounting for important expenses or understanding their profit dynamics. And you can't really blame them, right? Because Amazon accounting is really, really hard.
Yeah, that does make sense. And actually, yeah, it's true. When I went into it with no more than basic financial skills, I had quite a lot of marketing background, but like, quite a few people that I guess have been seduced by internet marketing. But without being rude about your area of expertise, there's less seductiveness about trying to get the bookkeeping right. And it's a hard skill. And yeah, if you haven't got a business background, it makes sense that what you've enabled people to do is run quite sophisticated, fast scaling businesses, but who have no skill, and that
Right,
includes
right,
me.
right, right.
I'm learning. I've gradually learned over the years. So what you talked about Sellerscale. So we ought to mention briefly, your software, although we're trying to keep this, as useful to everybody who does or doesn't end up using Sellerscale. But what's the main problem that you would say Sellerscale solves out of these things? Or let's define a bit more precisely first what the problems are. I mean, okay, not having money skills, not being able to use Excel skills. What are the problems that result from that?
Yeah, I just realized that I didn't answer your question because you asked me what makes Amazon accounting inherently difficult. So
That's true. Yeah, we ought to answer that first. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So there are five reasons. right? 5 big reasons. So number one is you have complex selling fees. And this includes everything from storage fees to fulfillment fees to refund fees. They're really not straightforward, right? So they vary by category. It's hard to keep track of them, especially when you have a lot of SKUs, right? So you have complex fees. Number one, which is a huge one, is that Amazon reports can be quite confusing, right? You have to manipulate them with Excel, right? They're not real time. So you have to put a lot of work after you download them from Seller Central. The third one is more related to cash flow and the cash cycle. You have bi-weekly payouts, right? So Amazon pays you twice per month, and you can't tie that cash to specific products, to marketing spend, inventory investment. So basically, you have all these things and you don't understand what influences certain parts of your cash cycle. Because at Sellerscale, we view your Amazon business as an investment, essentially. So you have a lot of money, you put it into manufacturing your product, right? And then you get that money back with a markup. So it's a cycle. And if that cycle is not profitable, you just end up cycling it, losing money. And marketing and listing optimization, PPC, everything that so many interviews focus on, it all just amplifies the cycle. But if you don't get the cycle right, you end up losing a lot of money. So that was number three. Number four is that it's more related to the e-commerce, the nature of the e-commerce business in general. You have long lead times, right? So the time between your initial capital investment in the product and the time when you get that money back, the payback period can be quite long. But again, that's the nature of any e-commerce business. And I've worked in different e-commerce businesses before. And you can really solve that by seeking external financing, right? And number five, a big one, again, the big reason why Amazon accounting is difficult is that you have two big software companies, Xero, QuickBooks, but they're not really actionable for Amazon, right? They're not real time, they're not specialized, they're not Amazon specific. And from the feature and from the UX UI perspective, they have too many features. So they're great, but they're kind of an overkill for an Amazon business, right? So all of this is not really sufficient for holistic financial management. So at Sellerscale, what we do is we make all of that transparent. So you can see every part of your cash cycle through the dashboard. You have different tabs, you have inventory, unit economics, P&L expenses. You can literally see all of your expenses by clicking on the cost tile on the dashboard. And you have 10, 15 positions of costs, the FBA fees, the referral fees, the Amazon subscription, etc. You can select any custom time period. You can see trends. You can group products by assets, product tags, categories. And one thing that a lot of users thank us for is being able to customize the dashboard. So it's very individualized. So you can really see in real time what products are doing well and not so well, and really have your hand on pulse on your business.
Excellent. So just to summarize back then, the reports are confusing. You've got to be
Right.
getting into Excel, which obviously, as you said, a lot of people aren't comfortable with. Honestly, some
Right.
people are like, I've literally had a couple of clients with PhDs at one point, two of them, and doctorates, and they didn't know how to do Excel at all. So it was slightly
Yeah, it
surprising.
happens.
Bi-weekly, yeah, the tying cash to particular products really critical.
Yeah,
Lead times and getting external financing. I guess the implication of the lead time and the external financing side, which is very true, is that you've got to have clean books in order to
exactly.
satisfy a bank, right? So I guess that kind of pushes you back towards Excel or Xero, doesn't it? But I suppose you need to have an understanding of what's going on first.
Right.
Okay, and then yeah, lastly the Xero and QuickBooks thing, as you said, yeah, they are general. What did you call it? Generally accepted accounting procedures, GAAP principles run it. So yeah, they're going to be pretty rigid and yes, for sure the user interface. And when I use QuickBooks now, I've used Xero in the past with my Amazon, and they're both just kind of can be a bit overwhelming. I mean, setting up
Yeah,
a
yeah,
chart of accounts just takes a lot of time, and if you don't do it with your accountant, it's a mess. I mean, so you gotta. By the way, and I just wanted to say right here, right now, that I do not personally feel, and I'm be interested to get your view that something like Sellerscale or the other sort of products like this is a substitute for having properly managed QuickBooks or Xero and an accountant. Would you agree with that?
absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, you don't really have to use Sellerscale to do everything that we're discussing, right? So you can really build your own managerial accounting system in Excel, and that's what actually Paul did when he created Sellerscale. So he was a seller, he was selling 500K at peak. He was selling a meditation pillow. That was one of his first products. And the problem with his meditation pillow was that he did not differentiate enough. He had really low pricing power and a lot of competition. So his unit economics were actually losing him money. This cash cycle was losing him money. And he didn't realize that until it was too late, and he was basically out of business. So that taught him a valuable lesson, which is it's better to do it's cheaper to do due diligence ahead of time, right? So he created this Excel spreadsheet, which he shared through the Facebook FBA. I think it was amazing Amazon FBA Heroes community. Yeah, I think it was Amazon FBA Heroes community. So he shared the Excel and he got a lot of feedback. And based on that feedback, he built Sellerscale. But as you say, Michael, I don't believe that Sellerscale is, you use Sellerscale for managerial accounting, but still have a bookkeeper to keep your books clean. Because, that's managerial accounting, but you also need financial accounting to have your books clean and to send reports to external stakeholders, right?
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. And I think that there's, as you said, there are different things right at the beginning. It's not like financial accounting is not important, but I like Paul's story, by the way, the fact that he started off selling a product at a loss and wasn't really aware of it. And then he went through the phase of doing Excel and then shared that and then created a software that sort of hardwired the Excel. That's a good example of somebody responding to the actual need. And there's
Right.
nothing more than your own need to go, what's going on in my business? So very interesting. So what are the other things that go on in businesses then? You talked about the problem that Sellerscale solves is the transparency issue. So in other words, finding what's going on, if cause and effect relationships, my product is underpriced because of it's not differentiated and that leads to this kind of cash flow, or be able to group things. What is it that's hidden in Amazon that we're not even seeing most of the time? So it's one thing to be making a bit less money than you thought you were, which a lot of us discover when you start doing your books properly. It's a sad but important discovery. And the second thing is then one of the reasons for that is hidden fees. So what are you finding about hidden fees? What are examples of things that are hidden?
Well, this is a discussion about unit economics, right? And you said there's a big problem that people don't understand their profitability, but unit economics is a killer. I think that Sellerscale is the only tool on the market that has this feature, unit economics. So most sellers use tools like Jungle Scout to estimate demand, right? But very few sellers we find dig into their unit economics and these fees that you mentioned. And unit economics essentially is a fundamental building blocks of any business, right? So it shows your average per unit profitability, costs, revenue, and we'll share the Excel spreadsheet of unit economics that Paul made for himself in the show notes. An example of that, we actually had one of our first users, a Sellerscale first user. He manages his own account as well as accounts for Sellerscale. So one of his clients was selling $40,000 per month in revenue. So it was a big account. But it wasn't until they plugged in the numbers in Sellerscale that they realized they were actually losing money. So the client was very happy. He was making $40K per month. But when he plugged in his numbers, he realized that he was losing money because unit economics didn't add up. The storage fees were high. The advertising didn't build the rank as they thought it would. So the ACOS was high. The percentage of PPC sales was high. The margins were low. And they didn't know that. I guess another example, which I recently discussed on our podcast, is men's shoes. So I had a guest, he was in men's apparel, right? So men's shoes, you have sizes 7 to 15 US of men's shoes, right? But you sell most of them 9 to 11. But those bigger shoes, the one that people buy from you rarely, they sit in the warehouse and they accumulate fees, storage fees. And because they're a different size category, you have a different Amazon fee structure, right? And if you don't dig into your unit economics, if you don't see it in front of you, you end up losing a lot of money on the larger shoes that you don't sell, but they just sit in the warehouse. You don't understand that. So I think that you can use unit economics mainly in two ways. And we allow sellers to use them in two ways. One is you understand your current per unit profitability, which is important. So you don't end up like one of our client's client, right? And the second is you model out profitability of future products. So In Sellerscale, we actually have a free Chrome extension. You don't have to be our user. You don't have to register or anything. You can just download this free Chrome extension. You can track products on Amazon, and you can add them to your basket, and then they appear in your Sellerscale dashboard if you decide to go with us. So you really need to model out profitability and sensitivity analysis, and you need to play with numbers before you decide to invest in a product, because your product is an investment, right? We always say that Amazon is a cash cycle. It's an investment. Your product is an investment. Are you getting any return on your investment, right? You need to know that.
You definitely need to know that. Yeah, for sure. So just as a recap, yeah, first of all, somebody making $40,000 a month. I mean, yeah, making is an interesting word, isn't it? Because what it means is it's going through your business, but not necessarily you that's
Exactly.
catching it. It's Amazon that's keeping it. And the men's shoes thing is a very interesting example because actually variations or variation-like situations. So if you've got a product line of quite different products, they may or may not be variations in the strict Amazon sense, but they can often soak up a lot of cash because, yeah, they're going to move at different speeds. And quite often offering a huge variety will, have more happy customers, but you've got to decide at some point whether some customers aren't worth serving. For example, size 15 shoes. I don't know what that is in British size, but size 15
Yeah,
is
neither do
massive in UK size. There's probably like one person in 1,000 that would wear that. So you're almost certain,
I.
unless you specialize in that and make a big feature of that and price it accordingly as well, then that your business is broken. And that's a very important point you've just put on, because I think a lot of people add have their marketer head on, and this is one of the problems, isn't it? That you need to have multiple hats that you can wear as an Amazon seller when you first start a business, because with a marketer, you go, well, I'm going to get more sales. So the salesman in you goes, oh, more revenue, good. And the marketer says, oh, more customers, more happy people, good. But the accountant in you should be crying in the corner because it's going to be making you a massive loss. So I think in the end, you've touched on something that I think is a more profound thing that people need to be aware of, which you touched on earlier, which is if you're coming into Amazon, and it's like e-commerce with training wheels on. I agree, because Amazon gets you a lot of traffic, and most off Amazon marketers have to learn to do traffic. They get you incredible conversion rates, and again, most people have to sweat to make their storefront or their store, if they're using Shopify, Magento, really beautiful and trustworthy. Build trust in whatever way they can. Social proof, whatever. Amazon's done all that work for you, but in the end, you still have to learn the skills, and you have to be able to develop, I would say, 4 or 5 skill sets: marketing, product development, which is huge, product sourcing, which is kind of linked but not the same thing, and financial management, right? And not to say also, to a degree, HR and communication skills as you grow a business, right? So I think you just put your finger on the fact that it's very easy to neglect the financial side with your marketing hat on. So anyway, that's my rather long-winded response to that. So let's
No,
talk
I
about,
totally agree. I totally agree,
yeah.
because all of the things that you mentioned, again, as I said, they just amplify and they speed up your cycle. But if your Amazon cash cycle is not working at the fundamental level, then you just end up losing money and you run out of business.
Yeah, and I suppose it amplifies the speed and the size of the failure as well, because Bill Gates said something like, if you add technology or people to a clear working process, it amplifies that good process. And if you add technology to a mess, it amplifies the mess. And I guess if
Yeah,
you're losing money selling one unit, then you're going to lose more money selling 1,000 a month, right? So
absolutely.
joking apart, that is actually what happens. It reminds you also that old myth of the sorcerer's apprentice. That the sorcerer goes out one day and the apprentice tries to use some magic spells to clean the whatever studio quicker, and of course it goes really out of hand and everything just goes fast into complete chaos, as opposed to just a little bit of chaos. So that's the last thing we want. So coming back then to capturing those fees, then what is the problem with that, and how do we solve that? Because there are quite a lot of fees that people aren't aware of, like storage costs, for example.
Right. So, I mean, again, these fees just do add up, right? And because there's so many moving parts, you just have to see them all. And again, I mean, in Sellerscale, we make it super transparent. You have 15 positions of fees. And if we're talking about unit economics, right? So you have 5 fundamental unit economics metrics. You have the daily unit sales, the number of units you sell per day. You have the average order value, and You basically calculated this metric by dividing total revenue by daily unit sales. You have the ACOS, which most listeners might be familiar with. You have the FBA fee, which is a fee, and in unit economics, this is a fee that Amazon will charge you to fulfill a single unit of product to your customer, right? So this includes handling, returns, shipping, and you can estimate the fee using Amazon built-in revenue calculator. But you do have it in Sellerscale. And then you have the unit landed cost, which is your total cost of making, packaging, and sending your products to the Amazon fulfillment center. So if your supplier quoted you a total of 2K to produce 1K units of shipping, your total unit landing cost is going to be $1, right? So to answer your question about fees, I just think that it's really important to have them in front of you and just to see how they add up depending on the product category. And the more you do that, so the best thing with unit economics and with all different metrics, the more you do that for future products and for your existing products, the more your financial intuition grows, right? So that's how it was for Paul. That's how it was for most of our users. They play with these assumptions. They change. I don't know. For example, you want to say, how will a $1 discount from a supplier affect your margins, right? So you make your unit landed cost to $1 less, and you see your margins go up by, let's say, 5%. Your ROI goes up, your payback period goes down, right? So you play with these assumptions. You see how they affect profitability. You improve your understanding of financials, and your intuition grows, as I said, and you can make better decisions going forward. And when you see these fees, these different metrics in front of you, they just kind of become a part of your, I don't know, entrepreneurial nature or somewhat.
I know I like what you're saying there, because I think you're right that there's how can I put it? If you're building a business model and you want to have either homemade or you import, use a third party tool like yourselves, for example, with financial management, you might think that you're just solving the problem of what your business needs to do, but actually it goes the other way back, because by building something in your business, by making your business better, that makes you a better business owner, because then you understand what's going on in the market better. So I
Exactly.
think that's a very important point you've made there. I think sometimes going through a painful manual process with this stuff can be important, because then you understand really how Amazon works. But also, I think you shouldn't spend very much of your time doing that, particularly if you discover, like most of us, that you're not very good at it, because if there's an existing solution for that costs a few, tens of bucks a month, that's probably a way, way better use of your money than spending your time on something which has been a problem that's been solved already. So, but in a way, in the end, what you can't do is, there's that phrase, delegate, don't abdicate. And that's true with people, but people will normally give you feedback if that's happening. Whereas software, you can also kind of plug a piece of software and think, oh, I've dealt with that now, and then take your eye off it. So once you've got something like Sellerscale or whatever software you're using, what would you say are the important things that you still need to keep an eye on?
Well, I think that, as you mentioned, you still need to do your financial accounting, right? So Sergey is all about managerial accounting, but you still need to have a bookkeeper, and you still need to make these reports to pay your taxes and whatnot. I also still think that you need to keep an eye on your marketing, because that's what amplifies your business and your cash cycle, right? At Sellerscale, we make the Pareto principle, right? You have 20% of the results influenced by 80% of the results influenced by 20% of inputs, right? So if Amazon is a cash generation machine, if it's a cash cycle, so that's the 80%. All the other aspects, product development, marketing, that's the 20% that we don't touch, right? Sellerscale is not about that. So when you get your 80% right, when you get your cash cycle right through Sellerscale or your own software or your own Excel table that you use for managerial accounting, you need to focus on the 20% to amplify that cash cycle. So yeah, I would say that. And one thing I didn't touch about unit economics, which I spoke of earlier, I think that understanding your unit economics and performing this sensitivity analysis really gives you an edge as a seller. Because again, because Amazon is so easy to enter, because the barriers to enter are so low, you have all these sellers from various backgrounds, not necessarily financial or entrepreneurial backgrounds, entering the space. and they're not good with numbers. If you know your numbers, if you understand your profitability on a per unit basis, it gives you a competitive advantage. I think that's really important.
Completely, yes, because what happened otherwise is that you get a lot of markets where people are basically selling at a loss but don't realize, so they're going to go out of business quite soon, or at least they're going to stop selling that particular product line. And if you know that, then you can make sure if your own economics are solid at a certain price point, then you can outlast some of those guys. Although it does come down to a product design slash marketing piece as well, which is differentiation, right? If you're not differentiated on Amazon, even if your unit economics look good now, I don't think they will in 6 months' time because somebody will have copied you.
Absolutely.
So, but I think in the end, what I always come down to, and this is why I launched the new podcast, just to put a plug for that in there, the e-commerce leader, where I'm working with Jason Miles, who's got a bigger picture sort of view. He's got an MBA and works in a corporate. He's also run his own Shopify store, online business for 12 years now, and been coaching a lot of people in that for years. So what that gives you is, in the end, each function with your business. Traditionally, if you look at an org chart, you'd have the CEO, then COO, so Chief Operations Officer, of which the financial department would be critical, financial measuring, which is what we're talking about here, accounting and bookkeeping. And then you've got the marketing, you've got the product dev, you've got the product development, you've got the sourcing side. If they all work together and understand each other's positions, then that's when I think you really start to build a really strong business. And I think what you've touched on in a couple of places is how some marketing and selling type driven decisions, without examining the effects of that on the accounting, I should say, could just lead you to speed up a disaster rather than
Right.
speed up a success, right? And I think that's a very important point that you've made there.
Right, and it's actually not only unit economics, because I just want to touch a little bit about overhead expenses.
Please do.
So
Yes, that's another thing that's under talked about. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So you focus too much on your excuse me, product profitability, but you forget about your other expenses, right? Your marketing costs, your rent, your office, your software subscriptions. And actually, a funny thing, we have an expense tile in Sellerscale, and we even track Sellerscale subscription automatically for our users. The education materials and just other miscellaneous expenses that you have, right? So, and I think that it all comes down to the fact that our minds and the entrepreneurial mind is actually wired funnily. When something requires too much thinking and keeping track of, we rationalize our way out of it, right? So your overhead expenses might seem insignificant, but I just think that you want to be systematic and really data-driven about your business to the most extent possible. You're never going to be totally data-driven, right? But you want to get close to that. So yeah, I think that ignoring your overhead expenses is a common pitfall among Amazon sellers.
Totally, yes. I agree with that entirely because people somehow don't count that as real expenses. It's like they don't kind of
Yeah.
see that as their Amazon expenses. But for example, I was talking to a couple of guys. There's a whole heap of people that seem to be involved in some kind of loose business partnership who are considering basically becoming my client, in the sense that three of them will work with me. It's a bit messy looking, I have to say. From the coaching point of view, I'm thinking, well, on the one hand, they need my help, and on the other hand, it's a bit messy. But one of the things that struck me that they said the other day, I said, okay, so you need to think about your overheads, including, your training costs, including my consulting fees. And they said, oh, well, that's a separate expense. And I thought, well, where are you going to put that in a spreadsheet or a Xero cookbooks? I would put that as an overhead, and I would put that under training, and that's an allowable taxable expense, tax deductible expense, I should say. You just got to account for everything that ascribed to your business, surely. And I agree, that's often overlooked, and that actually is another way of flipping it on its head, is to say how much gross profit, assuming that you've got your unit economics right. You think, wow, I've got that sweat done. I'm like, okay, how much gross profit do you need from that part of the business to cover your overheads? Because that's just your break-even point for your business, and that's a really ignored number. In fact, I rarely
Absolutely.
hear anyone discuss that, right? What are your thoughts around that? How does Sellerscale try and address that in some way?
Uh, I mean, yeah, we have the P&L, we have the overhead expenses tile. So actually, I think that one of the big things for an Amazon seller is, as well as ignoring your overhead expenses, is mismanaging cash flow, right?
Hmm.
So
For sure. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, like,
Which will kill your business, by the way. It's not for any
absolutely.
established. If you've been in business 2 or 3 years, you've probably got this sorted. I mean, this is like the first 12 months because
Yeah, absolutely.
you can't do that for long. But you're right, it is a big problem for new sellers.
Because in retail, I mean, cash equals business, right? So what Paul has, we don't yet have a cash flow calendar in Sellerscale, which we'll add soon. But again, we'll share the Excel with the audience, which Paul used for his business. So you want to have a week-to-week cash calendar, right? So just to understand what decisions you might make to make sure you don't run out of cash, right? So for example, if you have different SKUs, you might want to actually increase price on one product so that you slow down the sales velocity, right? So you really want to understand your cash bottlenecks. And we actually had one of the guests on our podcast from Nimble Seller. Uh, they have a business. They have a Singapore-based startup. They buy inventory from an Amazon seller, from a supplier, right? And they sell it back to an Amazon seller. So as a result, they want to make e-commerce completely capital free for entrepreneurs. So cash flow is a real problem, especially for new Amazon entrepreneurs. If you don't have any money to start off with, you can't start a business, right? And it's really easy to run out of money if you mismanage it, right?
That's certainly true. I mean, a lot of people sadly get to that point quite quickly. Um,
Right.
so, what would you say are the most neglected overheads then, or the things that you bring to light with Sellerscale and people go, "Oh wow, I hadn't thought of that."
Well, I mean, as I mentioned, I think that with Sellerscale, we mostly bring to light unit economics. So really, we have a lot of stories of our sellers that didn't know how profitable they were before they plugged their numbers in Sellerscale, and I think this is a big one for future products. So you have a product and you found a product and you think, yay, this is a great product. It sells great. It doesn't have a lot of competition. But then you run it through Sellerscale or your own Excel spreadsheet and you see that the unit economics just doesn't add up, right? And you have to let go of that product, even though it could generate a lot of revenue, right? So that's a
Yeah,
really big one. And I think that in general, you just have to have proper financial management with your business. And a lot of sellers, again, I mean, most of the coaches and gurus on YouTube, they focus too much on PPC and they focus too much on listing optimization. But if you don't have proper financial management, it can really kill your business. There's actually, I don't know whether you saw it. There's an episode from South Park, the three-phase business plan. Phase one, collect underpants. Phase three, profit. Phase two, question mark. So,
yeah,
and I mean, Amazon is, yeah, I mean, Amazon is not a black box, right? You know the variables that influence your cash cycle. You know what defines your profits, or at least you can see that through Excel or any managerial accounting software platform you use. So we try to make all of these levers transparent, right, to shed light on them so that you can make your decisions and make them as most data driven as possible. So
absolutely.
yeah, and when you have good financial management, you are crystal clear on all of your profitability across all of your product lines, including potential products. You track all and understand your hidden costs and fees. You have a pipeline of new products coming up. You understand their unit economics. You understand your advertising metrics, which is super important, right? Because your ACOS and your percentage of PPC generated sales. Actually, that's one of the most popular feature on Sellerscale that a lot of users thank us for. It is we have it really simple. We break down PPC sales versus organic sales, so you can see what influenced what marketing spend influenced your product boost. You can see the impact on profits and margins right through your advertising, and you should always treat your advertising as an investment to build sales rank, right? To build sales history. And another important thing is you have to be in control of your inventory and your inventory dynamics, which we did discuss, which I can go in.
Sure. Well, yeah, let's talk quickly about inventory, but we ought to wrap fairly soon so that people can get their heads around this because talking about finance, I always feel like people have to work extra hard
Yeah.
in many cases. But you're right. Let's talk about inventory management because obviously it's critical. You put cash in, you turn it into stock, and
Right.
then how quickly you manage, you sell that stock. is the classic thing. So look, my understanding of stock management and what I see again and again is there are only two problems. One is over ordering, and one is under ordering. In other words, you're out of stock. So how do you deal
Absolutely.
with those problems?
And I love that you mentioned it because for us, and we discuss this a lot internally in the company, inventory management is a game of balancing stockouts and excess inventory, right? So you want to be lean, but you want to have this balance. So some of the things that you want to keep track of is just monitor how many units you have in stock, right? Just and at Sellerscale, we'll have a separate tile, and you see how many units you have in stock. We fetch that from your Seller Central system. You want to calculate your sales velocity, so you want to see how fast you're turning that inventory. You also want to know your lead time, so you want to know how long it takes to deliver a batch of products. And you want to understand, I think the important thing is you want to understand your reorder point, when you should reorder inventory. And we calculate that based on the velocity, right? And the last one is quite popular, days of inventory, which is, as it says, just how many days you have of inventory on hand. So you want to keep track of these five things. So again, at Sellerscale, we automatically pull all this data from Seller Central. You have an additional column that says additional inventory, which you can add if you have any inventory from other warehouses, right? If you for some reason might not be using FBA warehouse as your only warehouse. And we also have a safety buffer, which is a percentage that you can adjust. But again, you don't want to have it too big, because if you have that, you have a lot of excess inventory, which you can't get rid of. And that's basically a liability just lying there.
Yeah, and one of the those are great metrics, by the way. But one of the things that also strikes me is this: that you need to account in your economics planning for the fact that you will be overstocked sometimes, and
Right.
equally, if you're projecting forward, your sales based on 365 days a year of sales.
Right.
Two things. Number one, you've got to account for seasonality. Never mind, nobody can account for COVID-19 or 9/11 or
Right.
whatever other strange events happen. If you're in Japan, which is a big Amazon marketplace, they have tsunamis, they have earthquakes, goodness knows what. But you can't account for that. But even if you're just accounting for Christmas and New Year, and if you're selling a product that sells crazy just before the holidays and nothing in January, that's one thing. But the other thing is you've got to account for the fact that you are not going to be selling 365 days a year, because you'll run out of stock at some point. And that's the
Absolutely.
first thing, and the sales side. And then on the cash flow side, you've got to account for the fact that a certain percentage of your stock is going to sit there, because you are going to overorder some stuff because nobody's going to get it perfect, right? And you can look back, if you've got a big enough, consistent enough business, you can look back at the historical numbers. Um, but that's another thing that's going to tie your cash up. And I think you just got to allow for the fact that you will not be perfect. And that's the other thing I see, is that business models that even on paper only work if everything works perfectly.
And that
That's not
never
very robust, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that never happens. And again, you want to be as data driven as possible. And Paul is really pushing our company to help sellers be very data driven.
Yeah.
But you can never be fully data driven. Yeah, but
No,
you can
exactly. Yeah.
be
And
as bad as possible. Yeah.
what I would say, I mean, I suppose that just on that topic to sort of wrap it up on inventory, uh, do you have sorts of rules of thumb of the sort of averages amongst your users of sort of overstock, how much inventory is tied up for, say, more than 6 months or anything like that?
I don't think I can comment on that. No.
No, that's fair enough. I mean, that would
Yeah.
be a pretty hard thing to get. But I do think, yeah,
Yeah.
you've got to get, even if you got an industry standard number that you plugged in, that you would just say, okay, on average, people are in stock, about 300 days a year in their best sellers. On average, people tend to, have stock that sits around for more than 6 months in, 5% of cases, 10%. Some number like that, just to kind of plug it in to account for the fact that we get it wrong. By the way, I don't know how you do that exactly, but it does strike me that maybe that's a little bit too sophisticated. But you've got to have a margin where you just know that you're going to be wrong and your business will still survive.
Yeah, and that's why we have the safety buffer, right? I mean, and
Yeah,
it's usually should be about 10%. It's usually around 10% for most of our users. But
yeah.
again, you don't want to have it too high because then you have a lot of excess inventory. But yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and what we've touched on there is the unsolvable equation. I mean, everyone's always asking me now how much. So I had a person, I'm doing a bit of management of their account's pretty small. the other day he was saying, okay, so how much stock should we order? I said, well, the truth is I cannot tell you. I can give you an approximation, but you will over order or under order. So just make your peace with that, and then make a decision. Let's make a decision between us that won't take you out of business if it's wrong either way. And that's the
Yeah,
critical
yeah.
thing, right?
But one thing you can do though is, and we had Orion Abadan. I don't know whether you're familiar with her. Come to our podcast recently. She talked about lean inventory management. So one thing you can do is you can shorten your lead times. So you can
Mm.
negotiate with suppliers to have just shorter lead times. And I don't know, if you commit to a certain number of products per year, you can break that down into smaller batches, right? And so that you don't take a lot of risk.
Hmm.
Another thing you can do is, I mean, this is from the cash flow perspective,
Hmm.
but if you have, I mean, a lot of suppliers basically use sellers to finance themselves, right? So when you have 100% prepayment, that almost never happens, right? Especially for experienced sellers. But for new sellers, it happens quite often. You're basically financing your supplier. You don't want to do that. So you want to negotiate. And the industry standard, I think, is like 30-70, right? So you have 30% upfront payment and 70% you pay when it's delivered to your freight forwarder. But yeah, I mean, you want to do that. You want to shorten your lead times and you want to negotiate with your supplier, negotiate the terms because you are in the same business. So basically you're partners and you have to be very transparent about that. So I think that's important as well.
I'd agree with that. Well, like inventory management, I mean, the people that literally do degrees in that, so it's university
Absolutely,
level
yeah.
stuff, and so it's hard. But I think you touched on some really good basics there. So just wrapping this up in a bow, then I think we got some nice free resources that you guys are offering. So just tell us what you guys are offering, and we can send people to a URL, which I'll give in a second.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have two spreadsheets, two Excel spreadsheets that Paul used before he created Sellerscale. We don't yet have a cash flow calendar built in Sellerscale, but we're sharing an Excel spreadsheet with a week-to-week cash flow calendar, which you can use and just plug in your numbers there. We also have the unit economics model, which we have in Sellerscale, but it's also a spreadsheet which has a lot of formulas built in, which you can use to perform sensitivity analysis and ask yourselves questions such as, what would happen if I create a 50% discount for 2 days on my product? How would that influence your profitability, your margins, right? So you can just see that there. Those two spreadsheets. And we also have an ebook which Paul, as the founder of Sellerscale, wrote himself. It's a 10-page ebook on mastering your Amazon financials. It covers the 5 most common financial pitfalls, and it talks just in general how you can keep your financials lean and tidy. So yeah, we have 3 resources that we'll share with you guys.
Amazing. Well, that's very generous. And you can get those guys at amazingfba.com/Sellerscale, SELLERSCALE. And also, if you, after all this, you like the sound of the software, I think we've got a deal for Amazing FBA and 10K Collective listeners. So what is it, Sergey, that the deal is?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're giving away a 14-day free trial, no credit card required, and a 75% discount for Amazing FBA listeners. So that would be Amazing FBA 752. That's discount code Amazing FBA 752. You could just plug it in Sellerscale, and you have your 75 discount for the first 2 months. Because we're a new startup, we're a 3-4 month old startup. We have a lot of beta users coming in, so we would really appreciate if you guys could test it out and just let us know what you think.
Great. And by the way, this is folks listening, that it's always when you get the best deals out of people is when they've just started something because they're keen to
Exactly.
get your custom, right? Later on, they're going to raise the price. So this isn't always the time to try stuff out. And if you've got a free trial with no credit card, there's not much risk. You can check it out. And I always feel the same as well. I would always say, educate yourself. If you're going to look at different software, different people's ways of seeing the world, then without confusing yourself and overwhelming yourself, you should educate yourself by checking them out. And they may or may not end up being for you, but you'll learn something. The way a software is put together tells you a lot about how the person who put it together sees the world financially. And Paul's obviously got the right way of seeing the world. A lot of things that are interesting, particularly the sensitivity analysis as being essential of that model. I think that's really important because it's amazing when you work out the economics over the course of a year, what difference it makes if you take, 50 cents off the cost of a unit or something. It just blows your mind how much more cash you may need if you change that. It's quite extraordinary. So that's a really important piece. So just remains for me to say, many, many thanks, Sergey, for coming on. A really important topic. I think you've shed light on a lot of things, a lot of problems, and also some, best practices that a lot of people really won't take them that much work to implement if they use a tool like Sellerscale. So thank you very, very much for coming on
Thanks a lot,
to the show.
Michael. Thanks a
Been a
lot for
pleasure.
having me.
My
Thank you.
pleasure.